right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. In a few short months, New Yorkers will be heading to the polls to start the process to elect a new mayor, comptroller, and over 30 city council members. We have 7 mayoral candidates with us tonight who will answer questions from Asian American journalists and community leaders on key issues impacting those of us in the Pan-Asian community. I obviously want to remind everybody that, we all had a very, very difficult year last year, and some of the questions definitely relate to how do we come out of this pandemic together. I want to thank the candidates for participating, and I especially want to applaud them for their efforts to campaign during a global pandemic. I can only imagine how difficult this was. The most exciting part of tonight is that we will actually allow the audience to vote for a candidate based on what they heard tonight. So Mitra will explain what the process will be, but now time is a wasting, and I want to introduce an amazing journalist and thinker, Mitra Kalita, who is going to serve as tonight's moderator. Mitra is the co-founder of URL Media, a new media network, and the publisher of EpicenterNYC. And I also just personally want to thank her for all the great work she's done to help vulnerable New Yorkers find vaccines. Just a little side project from the brilliant mind of Miss Mitra. So Mitra, with that, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for that shout out. I feel like in so many ways, the missions of Epicenter, URL Media, and the Asian American Federation are very much aligned, and I'm so honored that I have a relatively lengthy relationship with this organization. So it's really great to be here tonight. I just want to set the table a little bit. I think it's important that we recognize that as far as virtual events go, this is a sold out event, right? This was, the RSVP list just filled up very quickly. And I share that because, we're in community with each other tonight, but also I really think that 500 plus people being on this particular forum speaks to the hunger for us to see issues on our terms and for politicians to see us, our children, our parents, our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, our families, our loved ones as they're setting policy. And so I know there have been a lot of Zoom events, a lot of mayoral candidate forums, but I think this one is really, really special. And I do thank all of you for joining us tonight. Just some housekeeping. The Asian American Federation invited candidates to this forum using criteria adapted from the New York City Campaign Finance Board's mayoral debates. And so that is how the folks who we will hear from tonight are coming before you. The format is that each of them will have 10 minutes. We will have a series of panelists with questions and various lenses of expertise. And the topics that we will be addressing are, as Joanne hinted at, anti-Asian hate, COVID-19 recovery, small business support, and culturally competent services in the city. As Joanne also mentioned, I think as you're listening to the candidates, you do have a chance to vote before the June 22nd primary. You will be receiving an email, so look for that email. You can rank your 5 favorite candidates, and that will be sent to you by email. You submit that back, and then we'll try to get the results to you. I think there'll be some word later on how that's going to work. And I think also just as far as ranked choice voting, just to educate yourself, use this as the experiment, if you will. This is a brand new process in New York City. So tonight you'll also get a taste of how you fill out the ballot. Hopefully you'll continue to spread the good word and the education around that to your friends and neighbors as well. Very important note, actually. So without further ado, I want to introduce the panelists who will be asking questions. My longtime friend and journalistic colleague, Arthur Chien, who's an anchor reporter at Fox 5 WNYW. Lotus Chau, the chief reporter of Tsingtao Daily. And Thomas Yu, co-executive director of the Asian Americans for Equality. And last but not least, Diya Basu-Sen, the Executive Director of Sapna NYC. So I'd like the panelists now to join me. Here we all are. And our first candidate will be Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President. Mr. Adams, are you with us? I'm looking to see. Just bear
Yes,
with
I am.
me. Oh, there you are.
Always close by you.
You are. The Brooklyn to Queens commute is not so great, but we are close. You are correct. I'm sitting in Jackson Heights for what it's worth. Mr. Adams, thanks for being with us. And so I was just going over the format. We'll have 10 minutes. You have 1 minute for opening remarks, and then we will get to our panelists. So Mr. Adams, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And, you know, I say over and over again, when I communicate with the various groups in the city, I'm not a new friend, I'm an old friend. And I've been standing side by side with the various groups in the city, and particularly the Asian community, going back from the days when I was with 100 Blacks in law enforcement who care, and a young delivery, a man was assaulted, robbed, and beat badly. I stood with the communities, and this was over 20 years ago, and stood side by side. Even now, when an 89-year-old woman had her dress burnt, and I went over and visited the family and immediately called for the police to turn it into a hate crime and not be slow and really identifying these hate crimes in the city. And so I think that we're at an important time in this city, and the real partnership that I have had with the Chinese and the Asian community is extremely significant. And I'm going to continue to lift my voice to make sure this is a city for all New Yorkers.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Our first question will be from Arthur Chien. We've divided, as I mentioned, into categories. Arthur is no stranger to any of us. Arthur, are you with us? Anti-Asian hate is the subject that you're going to be representing on.
I'm sorry, here we go. Hi guys, sorry for the technical problem on my side. I'll get right to it. Great to see everybody and honored to be a part of this, and great to see you again, Mr. Borough President. My question is, over and over, we're seeing violent, unprovoked attacks on Asians across the city. In many of the cases, the community and many others, including those at the NYPD, believe that a bias crime has taken place. But as you've seen, when it reaches prosecutorial stage, many times that bias charge is dropped. Do you believe that that is a problem? And when you become mayor, what would you do about that?
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to commend you on your ability to highlight these incidents. And I'm going to have a clear representation liaison with the district attorney's office, and I'm going to speak with my state lawmakers. We should have no decrease in crime. We should not allow a downgrade of crimes that's involved hate crimes. The person should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We should not be slow in identifying the hate crimes. It has taken far too long for the police department's bias crime unit to ensure that we identify something as a hate crime. And then we need to put the resources behind a proper investigation so that we can bring the person to justice. When you allow that person to continue to walk the street, they're going to continue to do unprovoked attacks against a particular group. I don't believe we're doing enough, and we have to do a far better job of apprehension and of prosecuting, and we should not be decreasing the crimes, dropping them down to a lower level.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lotus Chau of Singtao Daily.
Hear me? Do you guys hear me?
We
Yes.
got you.
My question is about the Borough Jail in Chinatown. The city filed the lawsuit and the against jail failed. So a lot of Chinese community really against the Borough Jail, and they instead of using $1 billion to build a new jail, they want to use the money to recover to the community. So if you become a mayor, will you stop the project, or what are you going to do about it?
You broke up a little, but I'm sure that you were talking about the jail, and I've been clear on this message. I joined protesters the other day in front of the current site near the criminal court. I do not support building the jail there. I believe we've dumped on the Chinatown community long enough. I believe that there's a better way to deal with the decrease in prison population. Just as I pointed out in Brooklyn, where I voted against the skyscraper type jail they were attempting to build in Brooklyn. And so if it's wrong for Brooklyn, it's wrong for Chinatown. I do not support it.
Thank you. Our next question is from Thomas Yu.
Hi. Given the lack of access many immigrant small businesses have had around government economic development programs, and as we've seen this past year, particularly during the pandemic, how will you make sure local small businesses, particularly immigrant-run small businesses in our neighborhoods, recover and thrive?
Well, and we need to really think about what we're doing, particularly with access to capital, navigating the bureaucracy of city agencies. It is too expensive, too difficult, and too challenging to do business in New York City. And all of our businesses, including the businesses in the Asian community, were denied the first few rounds of PPPs that came from the federal government. So I believe we need to zero in on using the $22.5 billion that we spent in procurement in this city to stop spending those dollars outside our state or city and start focusing on our small businesses here. And then we need to look at what happened to the Asian businesses during COVID. You took a double hit. Not only were you closed down, you also were targeted by many groups who refused to show you the support. There should be a specific pot of money that is used to bring your businesses back online and have someone navigate the language barriers where many of your small businesses are dealing with at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Diya Basu-Sen from Sapna, NYC.
Hi, Asian Cbos are severely underfunded, receiving less than 1.5% of social service contract dollars, despite the high need in our communities and the fact that community members regularly go to our Cbos before any city agency. What is your plan as mayor to invest in and build the capacity of Cbos to better meet the high level of need in our communities?
You know, this is a terrible relationship we have with the local community-based organizations and those who are on the ground and the larger entities. Why do you have to be subcontractors? Why do we need larger entities to take care of our communities? I believe it's a racist system that we must end. You should be handling the needs of your community. You understand the cultural and language barrier. And even more so, what I find with the various nonprofits that are local nonprofits, you're not doing it for profit, you're doing it for purpose. I find a special drive when you are providing the services for your community leaders. And what is happening with the Asian community is similar to many of the communities in the city. We continuously have outside groups come into our communities and determine how to provide the services. I'm going to deal directly with the local community-based organizations, give them the resources, and we're going to monitor in real time that there's a fair distribution based on the needs of the communities, and your needs are high.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. As Joanne mentioned, my organization, Epicenter, has been very involved in COVID recovery and vaccine efforts. I did want to ask if Lotus Chau had one more question to get in on COVID recovery, because we're pacing okay on time. Lotus, you want to get something in and we'll get a quick response?
I just don't talk as long as my colleagues that like to hear themselves talk.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Brooklyn Chinatown and Manhattan Chinatown business hit hard because of the COVID-19. So if you become the mayor, how are you going to recover for the small business in the Chinese community?
Well, we did a few things because I was on the ground in Sunset Park, in Chinatown, and Flushing. And I also want to thank the Chinese community, something many people don't know. When we were not having PPEs delivered to the inner city, the Chinese community gave me over 600,000 PPEs to deliver to NYCHA residents, Harlem, and communities that really was outside your community. And that's a story that has yet to be told. But what I'm going to do is clearly, we must speak in the language and the culture and through the credible messengers that understand how to get the resources properly to the communities. And so I'm going to reach out to those nonprofits, reach out to the local Cbos, the business groups that I know so well through my years of being in the community, and have them become the liaison between the allocations of resources and get the businesses back up and running. The cultural language and the lack of incentive to really give the support to those small businesses in your community is extremely clear to me. And lastly, we're going to have our Chamber of Commerce, all levels, do the backroom work for the small businesses to allow them to focus on just rebuilding their businesses in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. If you'll indulge me before we let you go, and I'll do fast questions, fast answers, I hope. You're okay with a lightning round?
I love lightning rounds.
All right. Spring roll versus samosa.
Oh, spring.
Which Chinatown is your favorite in New York City?
You're going to get me in trouble, but I love being in Manhattan downtown.
Oh my goodness, I didn't expect that one. Favorite Asian restaurant?
I have a few. There's one in Brooklyn that's called Chau on Myrtle Avenue. I hang out there all the time. And there's another one I like. It's a vegan restaurant called Spicy Moon. If you haven't tried it, you have to try it. It's vegan Asian.
All right, we'll see you there. Thank you so much for your time this evening. We're super grateful that you were with us. Thank you. And we're ready for our next candidate as soon as Borough President Adams exits. Our next candidate is Shaun Donovan. Mr. Donovan, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you? Welcome. So the format, you know the format. We have 10 minutes with you. You have 1 minute for opening remarks, and then we will turn it over to the panelists for each of their questions. You may begin.
I believe I'm the right person to lead this city at this moment of crisis because I have led again and again in this city through crisis. I am the son of an immigrant who came to this city and found opportunity, but I became a public servant because all around me as a child growing up, I saw my neighbors sleeping on our streets. I saw communities like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn crumbling to the ground, even burning to the ground. And that lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. I started working at a nonprofit, rebuilding those same communities. And that began a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness, of racial and economic justice that taught me what it means to lead through crisis. Whether it was being the housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetime, leading the entire recovery at the federal level from Hurricane Sandy, or making sure that Ebola and Zika didn't become pandemics by working side by side with Dr. Fauci and all our leaders across government. No one has the experience at the community level, at the city level, and at the national level to help repair and rebuild this city, but also to reimagine it as a city that works for every New Yorker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. We'll start with Arthur Tien at Fox 5 WNYW.
Thank you, Mitra. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. We've been looking at a lot of attacks on Asians in this city. Going into from 2019 to 2020, there was more than a 900% increase. And the latest numbers I've got for this year, there's already a 450% increase over 2020. Another case was in court today of an East Harlem beating of a 61-year-old Asian man. Initially, we learned that there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not this could be charged as a bias crime. There are many people in the community, certainly in his family who believe that it's black and white in this case, meaning the decision about whether or not it's a biased crime. Why do you think it is so difficult for so many of these cases to go forward and be charged as a hate crime? Very often that charge is dropped. Why do you believe that happens? Do you believe it's something that needs to be fixed? And how long would it take to get out of this current trend?
So first of all, Arthur, let me just say, as someone who began 30 years ago, even as a student, to get deeply involved in the civil rights movement, who retraced the route of the freedom rides 30 years ago, beginning with John Lewis, and that formed a 30-year career with him. As someone who has been on the front lines of racial and economic justice, I was the leader around fair housing and civil rights in the Obama cabinet. In fact, so much so that Donald Trump was attacking my work last year, saying that we were trying to destroy the suburbs by ensuring any American, no matter what they look like, what language they speak, can live wherever they choose. I believe I have the strongest record of bringing not just the legal tools, but also all the other tools to the table to make sure that we're ending not just the violence itself, but the underlying hatred, discrimination, racism that leads to these kind of attacks. And that's why over the last few weeks, I've brought together leaders in the AAPI community around this city, along with African-American and other leaders, clergy, and many others, to form a task force to really provide long-term recommendations, both around policing and hate crimes themselves, but also to get to the underlying issues, educating our children about the true history of racism and attacks against the AAPI community in this country, to really build bridges across communities. All of that is going to be necessary over many years to ensure that we're eliminating these attacks. But very specifically, I believe we must do much more to increase enforcement around hate crimes. That's going to require changes in the law, I do believe. It's going to require new enforcement strategies, but it's also going to require bringing to the table trusted nonprofits and community leaders, because one of the fundamental challenges, as you know, is that so many incidents don't get reported because there isn't the trust to work with not just our police force, but all our law enforcement agencies to end these. And that has to be, we have to break that down by building alliances with the very organizations I brought to the table, leading nonprofits and other community leaders in the AAPI community in New York, who must lead on ensuring that we are reaching folks and getting a full picture of what's happening in our city, not just the most visible incidents that we're seeing today, but every single incident that underlies the violence and the hatred.
I just want to make sure we have time for the other important subjects before us. Lotus Chau, your question? Lotus of Sing Chau Jaili, of course.
Yes. My question is about the borough jail. If you the city appeal for the Chinatown lawsuit, and then the borough jail is going to build very soon. So it really upset the community. So if you become the mayor, were you going to stop the project, or do you have the other plan on the jail?
I would stop the project. And I want to highlight, I began working in communities around this city 30 years ago. I was trained as an architect and a planner. And I began my work working with community organizations who were re-envisioning what they wanted their communities to look like, not what government decided. And that's how I've led throughout my career. As housing commissioner in the city, I brought together communities to reimagine what housing could look like at Villa Verde and many other areas. And that would also apply to how I would lead as mayor, to take our Department of City Planning and turn it into a true community-oriented planning organization, so that you'll never be surprised in the way that you were around this jail, that you won't see a city government that's trying to bypass community approvals in order to get this done, and to really work with the community to understand what this new facility should look like. Can we make it into something that's not just about incarceration, but around restorative justice, that provide spaces to engage the community, our young people, to really get at the root causes of violence in the way that we've seen and the last question was about. Those are the kinds of innovative solutions to community-oriented planning I've pursued my whole career and that I would lead with as mayor, rather than the process that this mayor has pursued.
Thank you.
Thomas Yu of Asian Americans for Equality.
Hi, Shaun. Good to see you. My question is around immigrant small businesses. In the past year, particularly during the pandemic, although we had pretty landmark federal programs such as the Payroll Protection Program made available for businesses struggling through the pandemic, we saw a lot of immigrant small businesses, and frankly, many small businesses, wherever you are, unable to access these funds, and also local subsidy programs as well were hard to access for immigrant small businesses. I wanted to ask in context that since you were involved with Hurricane Sandy rebuilding, we had a whole system of rapid deployment of emergency resources for housing and for small businesses. It seems like for the pandemic, we're relearning and reinventing the same wheel that we had in previous disasters. What would you do differently as a mayor? And also, how might you integrate small business development in the context of your work previously, for example, with HPD and HUD, since so many of our cities' affordable housing developments are mixed use?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, Thomas, it's great to see you, and want to talk specifically about some of the work that I did with AAFE in this context as well. Just big picture though, we need a mayor who understands not just how to go get the resources that we need and deserve from Washington. And let's be clear, at this moment where we've just had a $2 trillion rescue plan and a $2.3 trillion infrastructure and jobs bill that's coming, this is a moment of opportunity unlike any we've seen in our lifetimes to bring the resources that we need, not just to recover, but in fact to reimagine our city as a city that works for everyone. And no other candidate in this race has the deep knowledge and relationships that I do to bring that aid to the city. But we also have to recognize, and exactly what you said, Thomas, is that the money hasn't gotten to the people who need it most and to the businesses that need it most. And that's because we haven't really used our community organizations like AAFE and many others to reach those businesses, to partner with them. This is what I started doing 30 years ago when I went to work for a nonprofit doing affordable housing. We were working with small owners, many of them immigrants, to get them aid. They didn't know how to apply to the government. They didn't have the lawyers and grant writers to fill out forms, and so we had to bring the aid to them and construct it in a way that it could really get to them simply, effectively, with very little red tape. That's what we need to be doing with this aid, not just getting more of it, but also constructing it in a way that it really gets to those who need it most. And the example I would use, Thomas, as you know, is when COVID emerged, I knew that our restaurants and small businesses would be hurting. I raised over $1 million, partnered with World Central Kitchen, Rethink Food. In Chinatown, we actually partnered with you, with AAFE, with Chumsito, and we got restaurants cooking like Kopitiam and delivered directly to people's doors hot, fresh emergency meals using an app that allowed them to order them directly. And so those are the kinds of innovative solutions that I have done, even while running for mayor. And that's something that I want to expand, those types of solutions as mayor.
Great.
Thank you.
Our last question is from Diya Basu-Sen of Sapna NYC.
Hi, Shaun. Thanks for your time today. Asian Cbos are severely underfunded, receiving less than 1.5% of social service contract dollars, despite us being more than 15% of New York City's population. And despite this high need in our communities and the fact that really community members regularly go to our Cbos before any other city agency. I think you started touching on this, but could you speak a little bit more as to what your plan is as mayor to invest in and build the capacity of Cbos to better meet the high level of need in our communities?
Well, your timing is great. I was actually with Sandra Ung who's a council candidate, and was with her in Flushing, talking about these very issues, that the critical role around housing and reaching out to our seniors in so many ways. Most folks don't focus on the fact that our AAPI communities actually struggle with the highest poverty rates, the least access, not just to the contracts that you talked about, but the least access to services across the board. And fundamentally, this is about reorienting our city toward a real program. I'm the only candidate who has a comprehensive plan around how to reach immigrants, how to create true language access, true cultural competency at all our agencies, and to do much more partnering with our AAPI nonprofits and community organizations around the city. I actually worked with ABNY to make sure that every New Yorker was counted in the census. And we partnered with the New York Immigration Coalition, with amazing organizations like Chau and so many others. I did that as HPD commissioner as well. And that fundamentally has to be the way that we reach so many folks that need help around the city. Because at the end of the day, the message doesn't matter, the help doesn't matter if the messenger isn't trusted. And that's why we have to invest in a much broader network of community-based organizations and leadership that can bridge those gaps, in addition to all the work we need to do on language access, cultural competency within city government as well.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone watching, Shaun Donovan served as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget under President Obama. I did fail to intro you adequately, so I apologize for that. If you will indulge us in a quick lightning round, I think we only have time for two. Nomadland or Minari?
Ooh,
Both
I'm gonna
have
go with
an
Minari.
Minari, okay.
I've seen them both.
Spring roll or samosa?
Samosa.
Oh, not that there's a right answer, but
Well,
that's the right answer. All right.
My middle name is Sarda, Indian. My uncle, the family that took care of my dad when he was away from home, was an Indian family that became very, very close to me, and I'm named after. So I'd have to say samosa.
Well, thank you for being with us tonight, Mr. Donovan. And as you exit, we will invite Kathryn Garcia on. She's up next. And have a good night, Mr. Donovan. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. It's great to see you.
Okay. Is Kathryn Garcia with us? I believe she is. Hello, how are you? Welcome. Former New York City Sanitation Commissioner. I think you know the drill. We have 10 minutes. You're invited to give 1 minute in opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Kathryn Garcia. I'm a lifelong New Yorker and I love this city. And I'm running for mayor to make sure that New York is a more livable city, an affordable city, where you can raise a family on your paycheck like my parents did, and where all of us are safe and respected, no matter the color of our skin. And even if you don't know me, you know my work. I was there pumping out flood zones during Hurricane Sandy. I plowed our streets, picked up the trash. I've managed billions in budget dollars and thousands of city staff. Last year, I built an emergency food program that has delivered 200 million meals to your neighbors. I am the city's go-to crisis manager and the only one who's been boots on the ground to get us through every major crisis over the last 15 years. That's the mayor we need right now, a get it done mayor who can actually achieve the visionary policies you'll hear from other candidates. It's time for hard work and action, not just talk. And I'm ready to bring us back better than ever.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Our first question will be from Arthur Tien on the subject of anti-Asian hate. Arthur, as you know, is the anchor reporter at Fox 5 WNYW.
Hi, Ms. Garcia. Great to see you again. Unfortunately, my subject is not a happy one. It's the massive uptick, the massive surge in crimes against Asians in the city, which continues to jump. We saw another case in court today, which is a suspect arrested in the vicious beating of a man in East Harlem who's collecting cans. I wanted to ask you in particular about this case, given your background managing multiple agencies. Where have we gone wrong here? We have a victim who lost his job in the restaurant industry because of the pandemic and was out picking up these cans to support his family. We have a suspect whose address came back to the Manhattan Psychiatric Center. And both the police commissioner and other advocates have said that mental illness is the common threat that they're seeing in a lot of these attacks on the part of the suspects. What is going wrong? Can you name one or two things that you would prioritize to do about this? And how long do you think it would take for us to turn the corner on this?
Thank you so much for that question. It has been really quite horrifying, the uptick in crimes against Asians, and particularly elders and women have been the victims of these crimes. We absolutely do not have a functioning mental health system at this moment. And we are seeing that the repercussions of that across the city. But it is also about ensuring that people feel safe in their city. We need to be doing everything at once. You have to be bringing back our small businesses so that people aren't out collecting cans, that they are able to go back to their jobs. We need to be using Kendra's law if that is what is required in order to ensure that people are getting the mental health services that they need. But fundamentally, we also need to make sure that we are getting all the information about where these crimes are happening. I believe that Asian hate crime is underreported due to language barriers, due to the fact that people are more likely to be going to Cbos. We need to make sure that we are doing a robust support of those community-based organizations who can get the message out and make sure that we're finding out every single time this occurs. But we also need to ensure that we are doing everything else, that we are standing up with people who are victims of this violence, that we are incorporating culturally competent curriculum into our schools so that we are talking about all of the
Thank you.
contributions that have been made by Asian Americans to New York City.
Thank you so much. Our next question is from Lotus Chau of Sing Tao Daily.
Hi. Hello?
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. The Chinese community is really against the Bo jail. They filed a lawsuit to sue the city, but the city appealed. And then the project will still going on. So the whole community is really upset about that because they don't want the new tall jail in the middle of the Chinatown. And after the pandemic, they really want to use the money for recovery of the city and not building the new tall jail. So if you become the mayor, will you going to stop the project?
The criminal justice in our city has just been incredibly challenged over the course of the last 8 years. We need to make sure that we are a city that is being really creative about how we approach that. And as in the last question, how are we dealing with people who have mental health? I am for supporting a renewable Rikers and moving in that direction and looking at whether or not we need new jails in every community, but fundamentally believe that we have to get off of Rikers. But I believe that we should be working with communities, particularly on the size of these structures, moving forward.
Thank you. Our next question is from Thomas Yu of Asian Americans for Equality. Thomas, did we lose you? We can move on to Diya Basu-Sen with her question, and we'll come back to you, Thomas, if we get a moment. Diya, are you with us?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining us. My question is around investing in Cbos. You mentioned a little bit earlier having more support for community-based organizations. Asian Cbos are chronically underfunded. We receive less than 1.5% of social service dollars, despite being more than 15% of the population. And as you mentioned, community members regularly come to us first before going to any city agency. Could you speak a little bit more specifically as to how you plan to invest in and build capacity of these Asian Cbos to meet the need?
Yeah, this is just fundamental unfairness. if there is a group that is 15% of the population, shouldn't that really sort of reflect what their funding level is? I believe in a city that is as diverse as New York City, that we have to ensure that we have clear and transparent rules about everyone gets a fair shake. And we know that there are many Asian Americans in the city of New York who are not making a lot of money, that they actually are some of the poorest members of our community. So in a Garcia administration, it would be about ensuring that there was equity for contracts, because we know that those community-based organizations are fundamental conduits for actually getting service to people, particularly in the Asian American community. And part of that is language, part of that is cultural, but they should be real partners with government to ensure that whether or not that's senior services or services for kids or services for small businesses or services for folks who are undocumented, they are the best conduit. And I would say, when you think back to how vaccines were rolled out, should have really been leaned on to make sure that all members of the community were getting vaccinated, particularly our most vulnerable.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Before we let you go, I wonder if you're game for a quick lightning round, and I will try to focus on small business because that was going to be Thomas's area of interest. So which Chinatown is your favorite in New York City?
So, this is going to get me in some trouble, but Manhattan's Chinatown is my favorite, even though Brooklyn people are going to be mad at me. But it's because
I'm hearing from them already on Twitter. Okay, your favorite Asian restaurant?
Oh, Joe Shanghai.
Got it.
I'm a soup dumpling.
And best slice in New York City?
Oh, L&B.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Garcia. It was great to have you tonight.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time.
And we're going to exit Ms. Garcia and make room for Ray McGuire, candidate number 4. Is he with us? I believe he's with us. Mr. McGuire, are you in the house? Let's see.
Hello.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Hello. What's going on? How we doing?
I'm good. I think you know the format. You got 10 minutes with us. We're going to give you a minute. Ray McGuire, former vice chair of Citigroup. I'm not supposed to say anything about the candidates, but I got to say, my father worked at Citibank for 35 years. So I just want that I'm putting that out there, but I'm not going to be nicer to you. Don't you worry.
I didn't know that you been nice to anybody, so I don't expect that. But listen, you got to talk to Papa. I don't know. I don't have to have that conversation. You do. So you brought it up. So tell him I said hello.
I will do that.
And thank him for his 35 years of service.
Thank you. All right. You got 1 minute to open us up, and then we'll turn it over for questions.
Listen, our city today, especially for our Asian American community, is broke. It's broken and it's divided. For far too long, people have made promises, and what we've done has gone back. And I've talked to people in the community. I've been around the community. I've talked to people, and what they want is something different. They want to have accountability. They want to make sure that their views are included. They want to make sure that there's competent leadership. And so leadership and management is what I've done in a large organization. I've led global organizations, many of which include the Asian community in leadership roles. I've managed budgets that are very large budgets. I've made certain that New Yorkers want accountability, and I've been held accountable. And New Yorkers also want to be included. And what it's taken today is being excluded. And this community ought to be included. It ought to have a voice. It ought to have a seat at the table. And that's that to which I am committed. So thank you for having me. I got a track record of having invested in the community, which I intend to continue to do. So thank you for having me. Tell your father I said hello, and let's have at it.
Thank you. I'm going to turn you over to Arthur Chien. He asks much harder questions than I do. Anchor reporter, Fox 5 WNYW. Arthur?
We know who he is. We know who he is. Hello, how are you?
Good to see you again. Very well, thank you. My topic to ask you about is the massive surge in hate crimes that have been targeting Asians, unprovoked violent attacks. In many of these cases, charging them as a biased crime has been a clear hurdle. The person essentially has to declare while committing the crime that they're committing a hate crime. in order for it to be charged that way. If you become mayor, is that something that you want to address? And I'm assuming that that's not the root of the problem here that you see. I wonder how you see the root of this problem, how you would get at it.
So the answer is, I want to be clear. I have stood up and denounced the AAPI speech and racism that is across this country. I have denounced it as being abhorrent and unacceptable. Discrimination and racism of any kind towards any group harms us all. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This cannot and will not be tolerated under my administration. The increase that we've seen is a number, and the number is probably higher, likelier, because some of these incidents go unreported. And so we're seeing this, and we saw the horrible situation that took place just a couple of days ago with a 61-year-old man who was simply collecting cans to help feed his family. That needs to end. That needs to end. So my commitment starts with doing something most leaders don't do enough, and that is making certain that we listen, that we commit to make certain we dedicate the resources. Anti-Asian hate crime or hate crime anywhere, we need to invest in the units, and we need to be culturally sensitive. So those people who have suffered from this have places to go and can report it in culturally sensitive and aware places that are safe. We need to invest in that. So I'm going to invest in anti-hate crime. I'm going to call it for what it is. I'm going to make sure that those who suffer from it have a safe place to go that is culturally respective and culturally aware, and do everything we can to make sure that we denounce this and we stop it and hold those perpetrators, hold them accountable and responsible, and prosecute them to the full extent of the law.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lotus Chau at Tsingtao Daily.
Hi. My question is that Chinatown already have 3 jail already, but the city is going to build a new tall jail. The new tall jail. Even the Chinese community filed a lawsuit to sue the city, but the city appealed. So the jail is going on. The project is going on right now. So it did really upset the community. So if you become the mayor, are you going to stop the project, or whether you support the Bow jail or not?
So the answer is, I do not support building 4 new jails. I think that we should address those who are the highest crime. Those people commit the most crimes, and we need to address that. I want to make sure that we make our streets safe. That does not mean that we need to build 4 new jails. $8 to $10 billion to build 4 new jails is not the answer. Yes, we should close Rikers, but the answer is not, until we come up with a better answer, it is not building 4 brand new jails, one of which is going to be in your community.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Thomas Yu on small businesses, and he is the executive director of the Asian Americans for Equality.
Thank you. Given the past year, we all know that because of many of the shelter in place and the closures, small businesses, particularly in the immigrant community, were really hit hard. And many were not able to access government programs targeted to help these businesses stay alive. As mayor, how would you ensure that local small businesses, particularly immigrant small businesses with language access issues, will we be able to recover and thrive?
So we know that small businesses have been hit the hardest. As I look at this community, unemployment rate is likely to be far higher than the reported 20%. We know that Asian American women are suffering from long-term unemployment. The unemployment rate has gone up astronomical levels. So service and hospitality jobs, which I know are the pillars of the community, have been hit hard. In Elmhurst, in Chinatown, and Manhattan, hit very hard. I was just there. My plan, go big, go small, go forward, creating 500,000 new jobs, specifically focus on 50,000 jobs for small businesses, where I'm going to subsidize half of the wages for 1 year, 50% of the wages for 1 year, let them retain a percentage of their New York City sales tax receipts for 1 year, waive fees, have a deputy mayor for small businesses that focus on making sure that these small businesses don't have to pay the fines, and that we ensure that they understand that New York needs small businesses. They're 50% of the employee base, and I recognize the importance of small businesses to this community. So my overall plan has specific designs to make sure that this community is included. It's called the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback, and it will do just that. Through my jobs accelerator, immediate financial support for small businesses, helping them waive the fees, and going forward, creating $50 million to a loan fund that's targeted to small MWBEs, and ensuring that affordable childcare for all exists so that we can get the community back up and running. I'm going to invest in my Job Accelerate program, recognizing the importance that small businesses had to this community. I'm investing, and I know how to pay for it.
Thank you.
Our last question is from Diya Basu-Sen of Sapna, NYC.
Hi, so Asian communities are some of the fastest growing communities, yet also some of the poorest communities in New York. Despite this, we as Asian CBOs receive less than 1.5% of social service contract dollars. Could you speak a little bit more specifically about your plan to ensure that all New Yorkers have access to culturally competent, linguistically accessible services?
You know, I have for a long time invested in the cultural organizations around this city. They are the lifeblood to this city. You are the lifeblood that gives us services that sometimes don't otherwise exist. We need to invest in that. I need to invest in community centers. We need to invest in care for the elderly so that the elderly can age gracefully. And the CBOs in the community are the ones that do that. So we need to raise the funding, given the percentage of the population, which is circa 15+%, and given the number of contracts that are given out to the CBOs, which is less than 5%, probably 2.5 to 3%, we need to make sure that we invest. And given my track record of having invested personally, I will make sure that in my prior firm, I'll make sure that this becomes the highest priority. We need to have culturally aware, culturally sensitive, culturally competent curriculums, culturally available community centers. And one of the things I do is sit on the board of New York Public Library, which is yet another way for us to access culturally and make sure that the cultural competence and cultural awareness are there, and get the tools and the mentorship that's necessary for our communities to thrive. And the CBOs are the ones that help make that, help facilitate that. I will invest the same way I'm going to invest in the small businesses, and I recognize a lifeline that they have to the community and makeup of the community. The same way I invest there, I'm going to make sure that I invest in the CBOs, because they too are the lifeline to the community, especially this community and other communities that need cultural awareness and need cultural investment, which is the track record that I've had for all of my career.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Before we let you go, would you indulge us in a quick lightning round?
Sure, I will.
Right. Tea or coffee?
You know, I'm green tea.
All right. Good answer. Which Chinatown is your favorite in New York City?
You know, I was just in Elmhurst and had great duck that I brought home. That was like very cool. But I like downtown too, Jingfeng. I do whatever we can to bring that one back. I've talked to some of the people who are responsible for that, trying to help out there. So
That's all right.
What can I tell you?
You can
I have more than one?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think
okay. Just help me out. I know you're tough. So
we'll let you out on that one. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. And listen, you have a partner with me. You have somebody who cares about this community, who knows that it needs to invest. And this is the lifeblood of this city. A culturally diverse city where we can bridge that divide is one that I am prepared to go lead. And so I would welcome your support. RayForMayor.com. We can't get there without each other, and I can bridge the divide and make sure that going forward, this community is included, sitting at the table, helping me lead this great city forward. Thank you very much for having me. And again, tell your father I said hello.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
I'll tell my mom too. She worked at Burger King when she first came here, in case.
Well, I know your mom is the anchor to the family. So, okay, we got that. All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
All right, let's see. Our next candidate is Scott Stringer, candidate number 5. Is he with us yet? Let's see. We're still waiting. I'm just wondering if, hang on. Just gonna do a quick check-in with organizers here. Hey, Arthur, while I'm checking in with organizers, can you tell us what the breaking news was? I'm getting a bunch of tweets where I'm tagged on, did they find a suspect in one of these hate crimes?
Yeah, Mitra, they did find a suspect. He's a 49-year-old. He was to be arraigned today, but it got complicated because of some of the charges. There's a little bit of a back and forth. You have the surveillance video, the assault that's on it, and that clearly can be charged. But there was a discussion about whether or not to elevate the charges to include a hate crime. And that's where it got iffy, because as you know, as we've said, usually somebody has to declare it. We have a very unsophisticated system when it comes to it. You basically have to incriminate yourself in order to be charged with that. And actually, right before he went into court, we questioned him and asked him why he targeted this individual. And his response seemed to indicate that race did have something to do with it. So then it got held up. His arraignment got delayed. And as of about an hour ago, 2 hours ago now, the NYPD released the latest sheet on it. And it appears he's going to be charged with 2 counts of assault as a hate crime, in addition to attempted murder. So those charges went up. But again, he had to say something in order for that to happen. I would mention in that context.
Yeah, super helpful context. I'm so glad you're with us today of all days.
And that's why I was late, by the way. So
no, that's all right. You were perfect. Speaking of, Scott Stringer is in the house.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
So Scott Stringer is New York City Controller. I think you know the format. We have you for about 10 minutes. You have a minute to begin remarks, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists for questions. You may begin.
Well, I know I only have a minute, and it's good to see some friends, good to see Arthur, good to see Joanne, good to see all of you. Look, I don't have to tell you on this Zoom, this city is facing 3 crises: an economic crisis, a public health crisis, and a social justice crisis. And the Asian American community has been impacted deeply, including from an underlying pandemic of hate and bigotry. Small businesses have struggled as New Yorkers stayed in their homes, and workers have struggled with lost incomes. Our youngest children have struggled with over a year of remote learning, while our elders have seen their senior centers shut down. I know that we cannot open the same way we closed. We have to center the Asian American community in our recovery. And that's why I'm proud of my partnership with the Asian American Federation over the years. We're working together to demand justice and protection for New York City's 80,000 food delivery workers who have been targeted with violence during the pandemic. And I want to use my skills as a former assembly member to reset our relationship in Albany. I want to use my experience as borough president to talk about real land use and zoning through the lens of community-based planning. And as controller, I bring the financial skills to bring our city back differently than we closed it and give everybody a chance at a real economic recovery. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Controller Stringer. Our first question is from Arthur Tien, reporter at Fox 5 WNYW.
Mr. Stringer, good to see you. As you know, the city is seeing right now a 450% increase in violent crimes against Asians compared with 2020. And 2020 was a year where we saw a more than 900% increase in the same crimes committed against Asians than the year before. I have a 2-part question. The first is, of the multiple things that you would do as mayor of New York City, can you mention one that would be critical in getting us off this path and in a different direction? And then if there's time in your 2-minute response, can you also address the difficulty in charging, often found difficulty in charging these as bias crimes? What needs specifically to be done to rectify that, if you believe that's a problem?
Look, it is unacceptable to see this hate against our Asian American brothers and sisters. And we cannot let hate settle in this city. You're right, Arthur, and you know this all too well. Hate crimes are up in the Asian community 450% since 2020. And I can tell you that as a Jewish person growing up in New York, I know the impact of hate. But I also know a couple of things. One, the mayor must have a zero tolerance approach to hate. And I would create a hate crime survivors fund to connect survivors to financial resources, because we also have to support the impacted businesses to make sure that we connect the impacted New Yorkers to culturally competent, multilingual mental health and housing services. We also need to know that the hate crimes are able to be reported with language access and support for community-based organizations already connecting with survivors. I would fund community-led safety ambassador programs, bystander programs. These are the solutions to actually working with the community to come up with a plan that makes a difference.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lotus Chau of Singtel Daily.
Hi. My question is, Chinatown already have 3 jails, but they don't want to have the other new jail. The community filed a lawsuit to sue the city, but the city appealed, so the project is going on. So it really upset the community. So if you become the mayor, are you going to stop the project, or do you are you support the both jail?
Look, I've been very clear that I do not support the mayor's jails plan. We don't need 40-story jails at a cost of $11 billion when we can use that money to invest in what we need to prevent people in the criminal justice system. We got to invest in mental health and public health and housing so that we can cut down the problem of rising crime. Look, Rikers Island is the largest mental health facility in our city. Thousands of people are there because of mental health issues, and we're spending $440,000 per incarcerated person at Rikers. So what I would do is I would reroute the people who are languishing in Rikers to the mental health facilities that will get people the health care that they need. I would also look to reduce the capacity of these jails, because I do believe that as crime goes down and we come out of the pandemic, we can push our jail population to something that's manageable while redirecting people who need help the most. But look, this plan was not well thought out. It was thrown together. We didn't have community input. We didn't work with advocates to analyze what the capacity is going to be needed. And I would rework this plan.
Our next question is from Thomas Yu, Co-Executive Director of Asian Americans for Equality.
Hi, Scott. Good to see you.
Hi.
My question is around small businesses. We've had such a terrible year for small businesses, many on the verge of bankruptcy, and have closed their doors for good, even though they employ so many in our immigrant communities. How would you make sure that as the new mayor, how small businesses, particularly immigrant ones, can access government assistance and funding to recover and thrive? And given that we even have, well-meaning programs in the past, like the SBS COVID loan program, but it inadvertently cut Chinatown in half, where half of the community was able to be eligible, while the other half is excluded from recovery.
Look, I think we need a real recovery plan for our small businesses, and I think we have to center small businesses and immigrant businesses in a way we really haven't before. So much rhetoric is about Wall Street and how to bring big business back, but I think we have to spend more time thinking about the thousands of small businesses that right now are hanging by a thread. We've lost 2,800 small businesses that employ 50 people or less. 500,000 people lost their jobs. As I toured Chinatown with Assemblymember Yulene New, who's endorsed me for mayor, I've talked to small business owners. They don't just need loan programs, they need direct cash. And I want to take $1 billion in stimulus money, redirect it to our small businesses, grants that would help, whether it's $20,000 up to $100,000. The reason we want to give those grants to businesses is we need to restock the shelves, hire people, pay back rent, start to jumpstart the businesses that are clinging to whether they can stay open. And also, look, even before the pandemic, we had businesses that were hanging on for dear life. We have the most vacant retail space we've ever had, and that was pre-pandemic. So we also need to incentivize new businesses to go to vacant commercial corridors. We need to also give the breaks to the small businesses that are here. But I will tell you this, one of the challenges that we face, and it's a real challenge, is how do we actually get the government off the backs of our small businesses? We have inspectors who walk into bars and restaurants and shut them down because they found a fruit fly in the vodka bottle. Or we have a Department of Buildings that average citizens, average business owners can't even navigate because you have to hire an expediter. I'm going to clean house at the Department of Buildings and these agencies. I'm going to get them off the backs of our small business owners. We have to stop the fines and the fees that are just collapsing the people who are struggling. So if we could give real stimulus incentive, if we can look at tax breaks to cut the red tape, we're going to be onto something. And I'm very committed to this. Now, this is not new for me. When I became controller, I started the Red Tape Commission. I identified 60 ways to help small businesses. Believe it or not, that commission operated years ago before the pandemic. We should take that report and also with my new proposals and with my government experience, let's start implementing a way to protect our small business.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Our last panelist question is from Diya Basu-Sen, the Executive Director of Sapna NYC.
Hi, Comptroller Stringer.
Hi.
I guess one of the things that we see is that Asian CBOs are chronically underfunded despite high need and a rapidly growing population. As with the vaccine distribution and so much more, the city fails to leverage and invest in these CBOs. What is your plan as mayor to ensure that New Yorkers have access to culturally competent, linguistically accessible services?
Well, let's just spend a moment talking about the reality, especially in the Asian American Pacific Islander community or communities. 4.3% of city council discretionary dollars and less than 1.5% of social service contract dollars go to the community. Even though the AAPI community makes up 15% of our city's population. And the community has real needs, housing, poverty, which is the highest poverty rate among communities, and there are real language access issues. That gap is immoral, but budgets are value documents, and we can't allow anyone to fall through the cracks. I believe that we need to reinvest these dollars, look at where COVID hit the hardest, but I also want to make sure, and I have fought for this as someone who appointed the city's first chief diversity officer, we have to direct our procurement spending to women and minority-owned businesses, but centered also on the Asian American communities, because part of the goal of procurement spending is to make sure that we create wealth in all of our communities. And you see underfunding in terms of budget priorities, but you also see underfunding with procurement dollars. I have spent 7 years trying to hold city agencies accountable for a new spend, whether it's with African Americans, Latino, Asian Americans. I've detailed all of the underfunding of MWBs in every city agencies. I'll be able to go in as mayor on day one and start to reform that process, but also my budget will reflect the growing needs of the community.
Thank you. So before we let you go, if you'll indulge me in a quick lightning round. All right.
I will risk it.
You'll risk it. This one's risky. Nomadland or Minari?
I haven't seen either.
That's okay. Spring roll versus samosa.
Oh man. All right, samosa.
Oh, good.
But don't disrespect the spring roll.
I've been disrespecting the spring roll all night, but I don't mean it. Last one. Which Chinatown is your favorite in New York City?
So here I am in this close race for mayor. Every answer hangs in the balance. Arthur Chien is on this Zoom, and you're making me choose. All right. Look, let me shout out Manhattan, okay? But please, Queens, Brooklyn, it's because of the pressure.
Thank you. Thank you.
But when I go to Queens, what am I going to say?
Well, it's a few blocks from here, so I'll see you there.
All right, I'll see you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, friends.
Super grateful for your time. Good
I
luck.
look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
All right. Our next candidate, as Scott Stringer exits, is Andrew Yang.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
Hello, how are you?
Okay.
So you know the rules. Mr. Yang, I'm Mitra Kalita. I'm the publisher of Epicenter. We have a panel of even more esteemed questioners for you, but we can begin with 1 minute. You got 1 minute to give us your opening remarks.
Oh, fantastic. It's great to be here with you. I'm a huge admirer of the Asian American Federation's work. Thank you, Joanne, you in particular. It's been a devastating time for our community, COVID, and then these acts of anti-Asian violence that have racked so many of us over the last number of weeks and months. I'm going to do everything I can to help the Asian American community get back on our feet. I hope to be the first Asian American mayor in the city's history. And I think that there are a lot of imbalances that we can help address. The fact is that we are 15% of the city, and we are receiving a very small fraction of that when you look at our community organizations or the resources that are flowing to different places. And we should change it. And I think changing that would transform the sense of the Asian American community in New York City. And I would say also on the other side, I'd love to be a part of activating the Asian American community politically, because right now, many kids grew up the same way I did, where we didn't talk about politics, but that needs to change as quickly as possible. So excited to be here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Our first question is from Arthur Chan, of course, anchor reporter at Fox.
Arthur, how are you?
Good, Mr. Yang, how are you?
Oh,
We're doing
you, Arthur. What are you talking about?
We're doing a lot better than a lot of our fellow Asian Americans in New York City. I've seen you tweet out the numbers, you're aware of them. I think going from last year to this year, 450% increase already. And we were just dealing with another case in court today of a beating of an Asian man in Harlem who was collecting cans to make ends meet. I have a two-part question. The first gets at exactly what you would do as mayor to address the issue where a lot of these attacks the community sees and even the NYPD investigators will see as a bias crime, but ultimately when it gets to court that charge is dropped. Do you see that as a problem? How would you fix it? And then if there's time in your 2-minute response, can you also address what you think is the root cause that has to be addressed here?
Thank you. And I did reference this, and it's something that all of us take very personally. The woman who was beaten in Hell's Kitchen, that's literally across the street from the playground my kids play in. And my mother has walked that block many times. The legal standard around hate crimes, I mean, the fact is we can see very clearly when something is a hate crime, but there's a legal standard that has not been met in some of these cases. And so I would instruct the DA to say, look, we need to be frankly clear and even more ambitious about labeling more of these incidents hate crimes, because like the legal standard is failing many of us. My specific policy recommendations are around funding the ongoing anti-Asian hate crime task force, and really trying to build more bonds of trust and connection with the Asian American community, because I know, and you all know, that many of these incidents are still not being reported. I talked to one woman who has been assaulted twice on the streets of New York and has reported neither of those incidents. So if we can make Asian Americans feel like if they turn to city agencies and authorities that they'll actually have responses, let's say even have foreign language resources that are there to welcome them, then we can do a better job of hopefully even identifying some of these incidents. I also believe that a lot of it is around just the pain that many New Yorkers are feeling because we're down 600,000 jobs. I think there are mental health issues that are overlapping with a lot of these incidents. And I say this in part because I encountered a mentally ill man who was attacking a photographer on the Staten Island ferry a number of weeks ago. And while we de-escalated that incident, he ended up attacking an elderly Asian man a number of weeks later. And so if you see that second attack, you think, well, this is clearly, like someone being targeted. But I do think it overlapped with mental illness in that case, having met the individual.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lotus Chau of Singtao Daily.
Hi. Chinatown already have 3 jails, but they don't want another tall new jail. So the community already have a lot of rally against it, but they filed a lawsuit to sue the city, but the city appealed it. So if you become the mayor, are you going to stop the project or you support the borough jail?
We need to re-examine the 4-borough jail project really from A to Z, because I've met many New Yorkers who did not feel properly included in that plan. Circumstances have changed. I do think that we should be moving to close Rikers as soon as possible, but we need a better plan that more community members are on board with in terms of what comes next.
Thank you. Our next question is from Thomas Yu, Co-Executive Director of Asian Americans for Equality.
Hi, Andrew. Given that small businesses have really borne the brunt of the impact of COVID and closures, laying off many of our immigrant workers, how would you make sure as new mayor that local businesses in our neighborhoods recover and thrive. And in particular, you had described an interest in, putting forth nonprofit lenders as a bulwark in bringing neighborhoods back. Can you describe how you would implement that as a mayor?
Thank you, Thomas. We need to work with community organizations like some of the ones that are represented on this call today, in part because if you look at small business services and the city agencies, it only has 300 staffers. And my plan is to reach out to every single small business owner we can identify and figure out what we can do to help, what resources they need to reopen. The fact is, any storefront that closes down is another empty, darkened storefront that could take months or even years to recover. So any small business owner that's trying to get through this time, we need to be reaching out to them and not checking up on them, frankly, about various infractions. I'm going to declare a moratorium on small business fines for a year and to say, look, if you have a lapse, you can cure it. We should actually have the opposite tack, which is what can we do to help? What do you need? And then have millions, even tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in capital to deploy to help ease these reopenings, to help manage some of the real estate, some of the, frankly, like the rent that some of these small business owners are trying to get out from under. This is not something where you can just say, okay, it'll take care of itself. We need to build an army of people reaching out to small business owners and figuring out what each business needs to get back on its feet, and then put resources to work. And I've run a small business in New York City, so this is very near and dear to me. It's much, much better to help a small business reopen than it is to let a storefront go dark and then wait for another person to come along and commit to a lease. That might be years in the making. We don't have time for that. And the other aspect too is that a lot of these small businesses, it's like families' decades of blood, sweat, and tears. It pains me to think about what's happening. I'm going to do everything I can to help.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Our last question from a panelist is Diya Basu-Sen, who is the Executive Director of Sapna NYC. Diya?
Hi, Andrew. So you touched earlier on how underfunded Asian Cbos are and how you'd like to work with them a little bit more.
Yeah. You can look forward to that in the Yang administration, everybody.
So if you could talk a little bit more specifically about how you plan to leverage and invest in community-based organizations to address needs like mental health, senior services, and so much more in our communities.
Again, the numbers are very, very clear. We're 15% of the population, and our community organizations are getting, I believe, about 1.5% of the public funds that are flowing to mental health resources and community needs. And no one thinks that's appropriate or correct. So let's change it. And that will change under my administration. The Asian American community and the organizations that serve our community is going to be properly represented in terms of the city's allocation of funds to various organizations. We can transform the way that Asian Americans imagine, frankly, the way we fit into New York City. And I think that's overdue. I think that's been a long time coming. So this is something I'm going to be very, very proud to do if I'm fortunate enough to be your mayor.
Thank you. So before we let you go, Mr. Yang, if you would indulge me in a quick lightning round. Some of these are Asian specific, but as an Asian American candidate, I think you might be all right. So here we go.
Yes.
If you were to erect an AAPI statue in New York City, who would it be of?
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I would pick a community leader or one of our early political trailblazers. This may be a little bit self-serving because she has endorsed me, but Margaret Chin is someone that came to mind for me. She's like an early trailblazer in New York City politics, or someone who's been working on behalf of the community and just hasn't been represented. Someone who's been part of like a small business community or even one of the early chambers of commerce.
Thank you. Okay. Favorite Asian restaurant?
Right now, I've been ordering a lot from Tim Ho Wan, which is dim sum. If you haven't tried it, it's very addictive. It's not the healthiest food in the world, but I guess dim sum doesn't really have that reputation. So Tim Ho Wan, it's super tasty. The kanji is very good.
And we'll stay on the food kick maybe for the last question. Which Chinatown is your favorite Chinatown in New York City?
Manhattan's Chinatown is the one that my parents and I went to when they needed to pick up Chinese groceries. I went to the Chinatown ice cream factory and got that lychee ice cream. So I've got a soft spot for Manhattan's Chinatown.
All right. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Mr. Yang.
You missed the most important question, Mitra, which is I thought Minari was better than Nomadland.
Ah!
I want to throw that out there to everybody.
Both have an Asian American connection, however. So, all right. Well, you got another one in there. All right, go have a cup of green tea or something since you were lurking on the. All right, it's great. It's great to see you tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Asian American Federation. I am super excited to get to work. Let's go. Let's go, New York City. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. And our next candidate is Maya Wiley. Is Wiley with us?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Oh, lovely. Hello, greetings. So Maya Wiley, former counsel to Mayor Bill de Blasio, former senior VP of social justice and a professor of urban policy at the New School. You know the drill. I'm Mitra Kalita of Epicenter. There are far better esteemed panelists who will be asking you questions. I'm just keeping things moving along. And you're with us for 10 minutes and you have 1 minute to give us opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'll be very brief. I have been a civil rights lawyer and a racial justice advocate my entire career. In fact, I came to Columbia Law School to do just that. And I've been fortunate to work at places like the ACLU, like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, starting my own organization called the Center for Social Inclusion, when after 9/11, Chinatown and the Lower East Side were cut out of the catchment area for federal funds. Created the Center for Social Inclusion right then and there to partner with community organizations, multiracial coalition building, because this is what happens to all our communities all the time. And I'm running for mayor because I know that when we work together and when we recognize it is our communities, all of them, that make us vibrant, exciting, that make us a place we all want to be, but also where every last one of our people are deserving of and worthy of investment, that's when we do more than recover. That's when we become one city. And that's why I'm running for mayor. Thank you.
Our first question is from Arthur Chien of Fox 5.
Thank you very much. We've been talking a lot about the rise in unprovoked violent crimes on Asians in the city. And we're at a time where there seems to be different forces at play. The city is hearing its progressive voices, and we have pieces like bail reform. We're trying to reduce the population at Rikers. We've recognized the role of mental illness in crimes, which in the past we would have just seen as crimes. But somewhere with all these moving parts, it seems innocent people are getting sandwiched. And a common thread in many of the attacks that we see on Asians are suspects with histories, whether they be of mental illness or criminal records. What do you see as a way where the city can progress, but not feel, not even do anything that would endanger the public safety of its own citizens?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And, I've been as shocked and appalled as anyone, coming from a community where, we've had racist violence, but the rise in hate against Asians has been stark and disgusting and intolerable. So one of the things to do is recognize that we don't have to choose between being safe from crime and hate and being safe from police violence and misconduct. We saw that when we changed stop and frisk, when a court said that's unconstitutional because our communities were over-policed, but violence didn't go up. So actually part of it is to recognize what is the right role of policing and what are the investments and services we need in communities that strengthen them and also strengthen our relationships across community. So as someone who's worked on these issues as a coalition builder, as someone who shared the concerns and focused on hate crime and what causes it, one thing we know is we have to make sure that you're to your point, investing in mental health services, absolutely. I've got a plan to do that, including trauma-informed care in our schools, including, mental health, creating a mental health crisis center, and also making sure that we have supportive housing for people with mental illnesses so that we're also getting more people off the streets. But I think you're absolutely right to say that doesn't take care of all the problem. And one of the things we know is there are different reasons hate crime happens. Some are opportunistic. Some are folks who are part of active hate groups. And all of those things require policing to focus appropriately on the job of policing, which means going after violent crime. But it also means recognizing what so many have said, which is we have to invest in community-based organizations. We have to build up the language capacity to have support services and create more supports to bridge across communities. We have to have more resources for public education, for culturally responsive curriculum, where we're also taking out the stereotypes that we have of one another and making sure that we have more knowledge, because that actually does help reduce susceptibility to hate crimes. One of the things that I had the great privilege of doing as a law student at Columbia was going to the Philippines to do human rights work. I had a huge eye-opening on just all the things I didn't understand about Filipinos in the Philippines, including the diversity within the Philippines. And there's a huge Filipino community here. Understanding the history is something that I learned. So I'll just say that funding community-based organizations in Asian communities, creating an API communities, creating more partnerships, but also making sure we're doing the public education work through our Human Rights Commission, which used to report to me, but also just making sure the police are effectively partnering with communities so that we are strengthening the response to crime, to violent crime, which we still must do.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lotus Chau, the chief reporter at Singtao Daily.
Okay, my question is about Chinatown already have a free jail. They don't want to have another tall new jail. So community already have a lot of Wiley and voice out that they don't want it, but the city they filed a lawsuit and the city appealed it. So if you become the mayor, are you going to stop the project, or are you going to support the Bow jail?
Yeah, so listen, Rikers has to close. It's a human rights violation. But I am not going to open new jails. I'm going to focus on alternatives to incarceration. I'm going to focus on the kinds of programs that work. We forget that the vast majority of people who've been in Rikers, I think someone said it earlier, but 40, it's our largest psychiatric facility in the city is Rikers Island. So we need to actually be creating the kinds of support services that address mental health and mental illness, recognize that we have so many people who are not violent offenders, and that for those who are, we have the appropriate spaces and places that keep the public safe, as well as make sure that we're investing in the ways that keep them able to be rehabilitated and able to move forward productively. I have a plan to pull. I saw in the chat the question about the overinflated police budget. Absolutely is overinflated. I've got a plan to pull $1 billion out of the police budget, but do that in a way that is investing in community to keep us safer, because we're actually investing in solutions. But I am not going to stick with these large jails in communities.
Thank you. Our next question is from Thomas Yu, co-executive director of Asian Americans for Equality.
Hi. Given the lack of access many immigrant small businesses have had around government economic development programs, even locally during this pandemic, how will you make sure that local small businesses, particularly immigrant ones with language access issues, will recover and thrive in our neighborhoods?
Yeah, thank you. That's critically important to me. When COVID struck, me and my neighbors actually formed a volunteer organization to try to help our small neighborhood businesses know how and where to apply for the payroll protection program and the city program. And it was a complete disaster. They weren't designed for our small businesses. It was completely impossible even to find the owners sometimes to let them know what programs existed. And then the money was gone before anyone could access it. And I know in Chinatown, for instance, we had actually because that weren't eligible. I mean, that was crazy for the city programs. I mean, so first of all, I've got a plan that is going to invest $30 million as grants to our small businesses that are in hard hit communities, which are communities of color, including Chinatowns, are all our Chinatowns, as we know we have 6. But in those businesses that really did benefit, and also creating the partnerships including our community-based organizations, because we do have to have language appropriate facilitation. Some of that is the translation services, obviously government must provide, but we also know we have a range of languages and government doesn't always have the translation. So we have to have community partnerships with community-based leaders and organizations and make sure we're resourcing the capacity to both find the businesses and engage with them. So for me, it's going to be a set-aside program. So it's not about all the money disappearing before folks can get access to it, but we're also going to cut the government red tape. I have heard story after story after story of our small businesses and communities of color, including Asian business owners, where it was just the constant fees and fines and inspections and the failure of the government to make it easy to understand what the rules and regulations were. So we're going to create a navigating program that's going to simplify it and make it easier, but also just give a holiday, a fee and fine holiday. We're going to support our businesses, not try to penalize them every single time we see a problem. We're going to ask them to fix the problem rather than create a fine. So many more things we'll do, but I also recognize that open space was a real challenge, particularly in Chinatown with the narrow streets and lots of unfairness in terms of those businesses to be able to get the foot traffic they needed. So, you know, one of the things I am going to do is have an office of public space management so that we're also managing our streets, creating more business opportunities, thinking about the flow of folks to be patronizing our small businesses and communities. It's one of the things we love about this city. And I'm going to make sure we're doing it in partnership with our small business community in all our neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Our next question from the panelists is Diya Basu-Sen, the Executive Director of Sapna NYC.
Hi, Maya. So you touched earlier on the fact that you believe that we should invest more in community-based organizations. Asian Cbos are severely underfunded every year. How are you going to ensure that this funding isn't just to Asian serving organizations, but also Asian-led smaller grassroots organizations that have deep ties to the community? And what do you see their role being in the recovery?
So the first thing I will do, and by the way, this is an issue we share across communities of color. You know, our small organizations, whether it's in Black community and Asian API communities, in Latino communities, we have the largest indigenous population in the country, urban population in the country, and all the language groups that that represents. All of us have this as a shared problem. And one of the things we have to do is actually create set-asides for zip codes and break down our contracting so that we're actually looking at and asking the question about leadership and board representation so that we're better identifying and ensuring that we're also delivering some resources to those groups. And a big way that we do that is both by changing how we're doing procurement, because we do procure for human services. I mean, it's part of how we get money to groups, but we have, this was something that, you know, I was working on with, you know, folks like Wayne Ho and Vanessa Leung when I was in the administration, which was really how we actually changed that. And the Mayor's Office of Contract Services has the power to do it, and it's a mayoral agency. And I'm going to make sure that we have a council, basically an advisory group of our small community-based organizations. I say small because, you know, to your point about the large dog, the big dogs in the field that usually get most of the resources, so that we're actually crafting it together so we know it works. But a lot of that is really just creating the criteria, creating the set-asides, and tracking it and making that publicly available and transparent so we can also see how we're doing and course correct when we're not doing a good job.
Thank you. So before we let you go, you're our last candidate. I'm hoping you'll indulge us in a quick lightning round.
Oh, sure, of course.
Okay. All right. Favorite secret spot in New York City?
Oh, secret spot. I don't know if I have any secret spots, but I do live near Prospect Park, and there's this really amazing little trail that's kind of off the main road that goes up a hill, and you kind of feel like you're disappearing from the city. Wow. And I love to run up there.
Lovely, lovely. Spring roll versus samosa.
Oh my God, you mean I have to choose? Okay, I'm gonna go with the spring roll, but it's a hard one.
That's good. All right. I think spring roll deserved at least one vote tonight. So
I love spring rolls, so I won't lie.
all right. Favorite Chinese restaurant, I should say favorite Asian restaurant. Sorry.
Okay, that's also not fair. I mean, because what kind of so I admit so our favorite neighborhood spot is just our little local Chinese takeout, which is China Dragon. But if we're going sushi, it's Silver Palette. And if we're going Thai, there's actually a neighborhood spot called To Be Thai is actually the name of the restaurant. And that's our Thai spot.
All right, last one, because everyone else got three, but you've hung in there. So this is, which Chinatown is your favorite in New York City?
Okay, as a Brooklynite, that's a trick question because that's a trick question. But I will say that I am going to stick with Manhattan. But the only reason is not because I don't love the Brooklyn Chinatown. It's because I have so many fond memories because we'd make it like a travel destination spot with our kids when we were young, and we'd go have dim sum and we'd go to the park and we'd walk around and they'd get to buy stuff at the stores. It's just something that is like kind of near and dear to our hearts, and we still do sometimes, even with a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old, because it was a family ritual.
I'm happy to hear that. There's a lot of love for Manhattan's Chinatown tonight, which I haven't, as a Queens resident, Brooklyn born, I haven't heard that in a while. So I'm glad it's supported. Ms. Wiley, thank you so much for being with us tonight. This was delightful, and good luck to you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you do. Be well.
All right, take care. All right, that was our last candidate. So we're at the point in the evening where I remind you all that you will get to vote on what you just saw, ranked choice voting. Consider this your dry run for June 22nd. Someone will tell you how that's going to come to you and how you'll get the results. Before I hand it over to the organizers, my dear friends at the Asian American Federation, I do want to thank the candidates themselves, Eric Adams, Shaun Donovan, Kathryn Garcia, Ray McGuire, Scott Stringer, Maya Wiley, and Andrew Yang for being with us tonight. And like eternal thank you to these amazing panelists who covered so much ground on a newsy day. So Arthur Chan, thank you for being with us. Lotus, Chau, Thomas Yu, and Diya Basu-Sen. Fabulous, fabulous panelists. Thank you so much. And I'm handing it over to our organizers. Hey, Howard, I think you're on mute.
You know,
we got you, Howard. You're great.
All right. So my headphones flake out on me sometimes. And so I want to echo the thanks for Mitra to the panelists and the candidates. But I also want to thank all the attendees for hanging in there. We went a little long this evening, but thank you for sticking it out. And I also want to thank Mitra for doing such an excellent job moderating this forum and keeping things running smoothly. Please, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We have a lot of future programs and events planned, and that's the best way to find out about them. And I also, again, echo Mitra, look out for the email that we're going to send about participating in the straw poll, and particularly look in your spam folders just in case, because it's going to be a mass email. And we hope to release the results sometime tomorrow. We're aiming for noon, but we'll see how things go. And we will share a recording of this event on our social media as well. So thank you, everyone, and good night.